Hello and welcome to this conversation between me and Teza, who is an MA student at IIT Madras and who is also a TA on this course on the Victorian short story. Today we are going to talk about the story in a detailed manner through a conversation which would cover the narrative structure, themes, characterization, and some of the motifs. Tessa here has a set of questions for me, and we will begin by looking at the questions and discussing them, and we'll also talk about other issues which are not covered in the Q&A session. Tessa, hello.
Helena, one of the questions that I had is, does the story seem like a mystery story because of Dr. Watson's narration? Because of the way he selectively reveals information to us, and because of the way that from the narration we are not able to piece together the facts ourselves.
Yeah, okay. Good question. There are two things here. Is it a mystery story? Yes, it is a mystery story, but it's not a murder mystery. Okay. Yes, it's not a whodunit kind of murder mystery, but there is a mystery in it. And your question is this mystery connected to the way Watson is narrating it to us, the readers? Okay, in terms of the narration, we can't have Holmes narrating the story. Okay, since it's a mystery story, if we allow Holmes perhaps to talk about the story, he would have to reveal his thought process, right? The contemplative side to him in words. Right? He can't simply sit and smoke his clay pipe. He calls this problem a three-pipe problem, isn't it? And this is beautifully captured in this illustration by Sidney Paget, isn't it? For the very first edition of this detective fiction in 1891 in the Strand magazine. So we need a narrator who is clueless. Yes. Who doesn't know what's going on in terms of the plot that is being woven around this client, Jabez Wilson. He has to be dim-witted.
Yes.
Right? Watson has to be dim-witted. He has to be dull. He has to be this commonplace, average guy who is not as clever as Holmes. If we have a cleverer biographer, then this wouldn't be a terrible mystery, yes. Right? So Watson is important, as you are trying to get at in your set of questions that you have structured. So Watson is important in the sense that he is saving the mystery in some sense for the readers, and at the same time Holmes is not very communicative either, right? If you look at the story, he just says, don't talk to me for a while, for 50 minutes at least.
And that makes me wonder if they're going to the concert was just a way. He says, I want to introspect. German music is introspective, and I want to introspect. Is that a way of, he can sit there waving his fingers into one another, a way of making Watson quiet?
Possible. It's possible. But what I would also think is that he is acting as a decoy, not only to a kind of a decoy figure, not only to Watson to put him off, right? And he's also acting as a decoy to the readers, yes, as well, right? We would think that Holmes has completely forgotten about the, red-headed client, and he's simply enjoying the music. But I would think that the music is performing a similar function as the pipe is performing for him.
Yes.
Right? So the music gives him some kind of brain stimulation to kind of untangle the mystery, just as this tobacco as a stimulant in his pipe is giving him the space and that energy to kind of think about the problem in a very, very rational manner. So these activities, though they are very enjoyable in themselves for Holmes, they also serve a narrative function. Narrative function to Holmes himself to uncover the plot, to kind of disentangle the confused trajectory, right, which is being woven around Jabez Wilson. So you're quite right in one sense that listening to music and enjoying the clay pipe is shutting down Watson, and Watson becomes clueless, right? He doesn't know what's going on in his mind, but at the same time, it also has a specific function to perform. That's my reading of these two elements in the narrative.
Yes. That also actually connects to my next question. You mentioned that Holmes speaks, Holmes is not very communicative. He
Yeah.
speaks little.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes me wonder, the few times Holmes speaks, is Holmes an unreliable narrator? Because the few times he speaks, there are things like he makes the statement that there is nothing to see on Jabez Wilson's person than the obvious facts, knowing fully well that the facts aren't exactly obvious to everyone, including Watson. There's this place where he chides Watson for having embellished his little adventures and still wants him along as his own boss will.
Yeah.
And the ending quote as well, it is not the man who is important but his work that is important. All the while when we have been given a very individualistic picture.
Yeah.
Does that render Holmes as an unreliable narrator?
Right. Okay, there are too many things here in your question which needs to be taken one by one and studied. The first section is Holmes unreliable? Does he say one thing and do another, or think another point of view? So there seems to be some kind of contradiction there. Apparently yes, but if we try to look at the motivations of the story, this particular detective genre, he is, once again, as I said, he is kind of a figure who is acting as some kind of decoy. If it's obvious to you, then it's not the heart of the matter, right? He has that kind of attitude, right? So what he is going for is the real kernel of information that is hidden beneath the obvious. So if Watson can look at the obvious and understand it, and that's not going to be the heart of the mystery. And as I said earlier too in my sessions, Jabez Wilson himself is not the point. He's just a victim. He's also another decoy figure, right? Clay and Duncan Morris use Jabez Wilson as an outward figure, and they kind of do something else in relation to him, right? They use his pawnbroker's business because it's ideally situated, right? So if you pay a lot of attention to Jabez Wilson and his personal histories, then nothing is going to come out of it. Which is what Holmes says that at one point in the story. Can you pick up those lines from the story?
You see, Watson, he explained in the early hours of the morning as we sat over a glass of whiskey and soda in Baker Street. It was perfectly obvious from the first that the only possible object of this rather fantastic business of the advertisement of the League and the copying of the encyclopedia must be to get this not overbright pawnbroker out of the way for a number of hours every day. It was a curious way of managing it, but really it would be difficult to suggest a better. The method was no doubt suggested to Clay's ingenious mind by the color of his accomplice's hair. The £1 a week was a lure which must draw him, and what was it to them who were playing for thousands? They put in the advertisement, one rogue has the temporary office, the other rogue incites the man to apply for it, and together they managed to secure his absence every morning in the week. From the time I heard of the assistant having come for half wages, it was obvious to me that he had some strong motive for securing the situation.
Yes. So can you read further until that, however, was out of the question?
But how could you guess what the motive was? Had there been women in the house, I should have suspected a mere vulgar intrigue. That, however, was out of the question.
Okay. So and the next line is also interesting. Which is, the man's business was a small one. There was nothing in his house which could account for such elaborate preparations and such an expenditure as they were at. So what is the point of this exercise at reading this section is to address your question in a different way, which is that the figure of Jabez Wilson and his physical appearance and all the details about him are not so important as his situation or as his pawnbroker situation in relation to a particular other building,
Yes.
right? That bank, which abuts on the other side of the pawnbroker's business. So, as I said again, so he is just a pawn. And it's a pun on the pawnbroker's business as well, right? So they're trying to get him out of the house to secure their ends, the villains of the story. So that's one thing. And Holmes further says that if there had been women in the house, then maybe Jabez Wilson would have been interesting. Right, his physical appearance and his cultural context, social context, whatever. So, and I want to connect this to another point, which we were talking about earlier, which is that Watson asks him, you wanted to look at Clay's face, right? Did you go to the place and knock on the door to get a look at the assistant's face? And he says, not the face, because everybody would think the same thing, right? An ordinary reader would think that, yes, Holmes wanted to see him. And he says, no, I don't want to do the obvious. I want to do something else. I want to look at his knees, the state of his trousers, right? So he doesn't want to go to the most obvious thing. He has something else which is hiding behind the commonplace, the bizarre, the everyday, the humdrum, right? So and again, that ties in with this notion of all these sensation fiction that came out in the 1860s, which is that there is extraordinarily brutal things happening in mundane places such as a middle class home. Right? So there's plenty of abuse, there's murder, there's extortion, there's blackmail going on beneath the really respectable exteriors of a suburban home in London, right? So it's kind of picking up on all those cues that are left behind in these kinds of fiction that came before, right? Before Conan Doyle started writing Sherlock Holmes narratives. In fact, we have this genre called the country house fiction in literature. And in fact, Jane Austen's works can be termed as country house fiction as well, in some sense, because of the importance given to Vickers, the gentleman in the manor, and other aspects, right? So there is a distinct trajectory called country house fiction, country house literature, which celebrates the pastoral aspect, the really beautiful, serene aspects of life, and at the same time, this country house fiction took a different hue, took a different color as it moved down the century, and because of the impact of industrialization and other kinds of fiction which were influencing British domestic fiction, we started getting something very, very interesting as the sensation fiction, which I said, houses, murder, intrigue, blackmail, you name it, forgery and other things behind this very, very homely setup of a house, a country house.
What I understand is that from this conversation is that many of the elements in the narrative are ideally situated so as to suit the genre.
Yeah. Yeah, if you I wanted to bring some excerpts, interview excerpts, between Conan Doyle and other figures, in which Doyle also talks about the character of Holmes, right? Maybe I will put it up later as part of additional material for the course. But to answer this question, we got to remember that Holmes is not an original invention. He's not created out of the blue by Doyle. In fact, Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin, Auguste Dupin, is the precursor to Holmes. And in fact, in one of the earlier stories of the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Watson asks, you remind me, Watson tells Holmes that you remind me of Auguste Dupin, right? So everybody knows that he is kind of walking in the tradition of this earlier detective, very, very famous detective of the 1840s, created by this figure, Edgar Allan Poe, this American creator, Edgar Allan Poe. So he has borrowed the characteristics, but he has embellished it in some sense to create a really, really awesome and sublime figure in Holmes. So he does have his models, literary models in literature.
Every character appears to be profiled in some way or the another, and we understand what characteristics can be mocked, For example, J.B. Wilson's character, it has certain attributes to it which make even Watson and Holmes break out into laughter.
Yeah.
Which sort of sanction the laughter as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other characters as well, like the inspector, who are good for certain things, but who cannot be taken into confidence beyond that. And we know what things to disapprove of, what things to take into confidence. And we have a very preoccupied Merriweather, the bank
director, yeah,
who towards the end, after watching Holmes' spectacle, turns very obsequious as well. So how do you understand this kind of profiling in terms of character?
Yeah, okay. So it's a interesting question, because when you were asking me this question, I was thinking about the origins of literary fiction itself, because all these stories began as character sketches. So character sketches were interesting fictional narratives, literary narratives, which were consumed by the market, by the British market. So it is tied up to that originary narrative of fiction itself. That's one thing. In terms of other perspectives, we need a set of characters for a fiction to work out, especially a detective fiction to work out. And we need a set of characters in a closed atmosphere, which means you will get the details of every figure who is coming into that space very well delineated in fiction. And if you look at the layout of 221 Baker Street, it's a closed space, very claustrophobic, full of things, right? Very odd and eccentric things. And the job of Holmes is to kind of list out, either in his mind or in his words, the various details which kind of fascinate him, because these details are a cue into the mystery of the figure who's sitting in front of him, right? So as I was pointing out earlier in some of my discussions, this listing out becomes very important for Holmes, because he synthesizes or analyzes this list of details or facts or information, and tries to produce a coherent narrative at the end of that synthesis or analysis. It's like an experiment. He puts stuff in it, chemical ingredients in it, and he gets a result, a particular kind of colored gas or whatever. The same kind of process is adopted by him in reading humanity. So which is perhaps why Watson, who is his biographer, is forced to kind of imitate Holmes in some way, and capture the various profiles of figures who are walking through this stage that Dickens is that Holmes is orchestrating for us, or Doyle is orchestrating for us. So this character profiling is important. But to come to the other part of your question is, are we being led by Holmes to judge a particular character in a particular way, or are we being led by this duo, Watson and Holmes, to kind of read a particular character in a particular way? Yes, they are doing that. They're nudging us in some to kind of laugh at people, to appreciate people, and to kind of warm towards certain people, right? And the perfect example would be J.B. Wilson, because he's laughed at, and he doesn't take it approvingly. He is annoyed. He says that if you're going to laugh at me, I'm going to go elsewhere. He's offended. And he's rightly offended, because he doesn't belong to the same class position as Watson and Holmes. He's a small-time trader, right? And he was and he began life as a working class figure, because he was a ship's carpenter, right? So he is aware of his class position, and when he's being laughed at, he takes it seriously. But as to analyzing the motivations behind Holmes and Watson's laughter, we need to think about their assessments of him. They think that he has been terribly greedy in some sense, right? And since he has lost his really cushy income, really kind of luxurious £4 a week income, he has come to them immediately to seek redressal and to get back that job. So they understand his greed, but hiding behind that judgment is also an awareness that he is a figure from the lower classes who is doing some kind of social climbing. He was a working class figure, and now he becomes a lower middle class character, and he's pretending to be shabby genteel. He's pretending to be a genteel figure, right? And if you connect that with the setting to which he belongs in terms of his business, it all ties in neatly together. So they are frowning upon his aspirations to class mobility. That could be one assumption that we can reasonably draw on, right? And but you're right, to answer your question straightly, yes, they are kind of guiding us, but we need to read against the grain to understand the complications.
In relation to that, I actually have another question, which is when we were talking about class, Jabez Wilson's class is, although not very explicitly, seems to be laughed at, frowned upon. And then coming on to the latter part of the story, we see like John Clay's class position talked about extensively.
Yes.
In a way, that is also mocked at.
Yes, absolutely. You're quite right. Just to go back to that earlier point about the class position of Jabez Wilson, actually that is made quite clear in that description of his shop's location.
Yes.
In terms of the descriptions of its appearance, even the word shabby genteel, that's a sign that this man is aspiring towards the middle class ethics or middle class ideologies, which is why he's trying to dress in a particular way, but it all fails. It all fails, right? All that fake ornamentation that he has and things like that, right? So that is being kind of subtly critiqued by Holmes and Watson. What is also critiqued is his greed. That's also there. And they seem to be implying that these figures are very greedy, right? This aspirational lower middle class, working class characters are greedy, and that is kind of implied in this kind of character sketch of Jabez Wilson. So that thing is established very diplomatically, strategically by the narrative. The other thing that you have raised is John Clay's position. John Clay is a very, very interesting character. Even the word John Clay, the two words John Clay, right? John is a very commonplace name. John Watson. John, the first name is very common. John Doe, as you say. Clay, as I said, is symbolic of his character motivation, something that's very base, something that is not aspiring to the sophisticated, narratives that elite middle class professionals have. So that kind of quality is indicated by his name, John Clay, but running contrary to that narrative is this narrative of his, which is that he has royal ancestry, noble blood, royal blood, and things like that. And on top of that, we get the information from Jones that he has been to Eton, Oxford. So we have a very, very contradictory set of notions about John Clay. If he's well read, why is he performing all these base acts? Right? So we are also told that just because somebody is well read, just because somebody who has gone to Eton or Oxford, we can't assume that he would stick to the sophisticated, civilized attitudes that are natural to figures who have been to all these places. Right? So at some point in the 19th century, things become very, very complicated. The upper class don't behave in a way that's expected of them. The lower classes do not behave in a way that is expected of them. There is structural kind of shifts. Class positions seem to be kind of moving up, above and below in terms of the way the society is structured. And perhaps John Clay is a victim of that kind of shifts. Right?
John Clay is very proud of the fact that he has noble blood in him.
Yes.
Even that is laughed at.
Yes, the mockery aspect, So we need to remember that the upper classes are consistently in a particular set of fiction consistently mocked at. They are figured as villains. If you look at Wilkie Collins' fictions, some of these upper class figures are degenerate. Some of them are very studious, but at the same time they have these degenerate tendencies. Okay, so that could symbolically indicate, I'm just giving a very, very brief summation of what's going on in terms of the fall of the gentry, fall of the upper elite sections of society. So that kind of loss of power of the upper classes in society is indicated, is reflected in the literature of the day. And again, I want to go back to Jane Austen, because you can see that the heroines in Jane Austen do not go for all these elite, gentlemen. As you read the novels, her last published Persuasion, she rejects the baronet for a middle class captain, right? So that move away from the charms, from the aspects of upper class figures towards the rising middle classes is also there. But to come back to the mockery which you are interested in, Holmes and Watson are, Holmes is a doctor. Watson is a doctor. He's a GP. He's a professional class, and Holmes is also very well educated, right? So they belong to this they belong to this rising professional classes, which is mocking both the ones who are above them and those who are below them. They think that they hold the moral order. Right, so that is also there when we see figures like the Jones character laughing at John Clay, and he laughs at him in a righteous way too, and quite right.
In a way, is this some kind of prioritizing of reason, of the rationality of
Yes,
the profession?
yes, absolutely. In fact, that's there. Holmes's way of working things out.
Yes,
Right?
incisive.
Yeah, very in a very methodical way, as if he's conducting an experiment, and all this is held above the rest of the kind of work that is kind of indicated in some fiction which includes Doyle's as well. So he thinks he's superior to the bulky Jones, right? Holmes thinks that he's superior to the bulky because he does mind work rather than the physical job of kind of hauling criminals, which is also pointed out by Jones. Can you read that section?
We're hunting in couples again, Doctor, you see, said Jones in his consequential way. Our friend here is a wonderful man for starting a chase. All he wants is an old dog to help him to do the running.
So Jones knows his position in relation to Holmes's worldview, right? Holmes's cleverness lies in starting a chase, right? So he can sit in his armchair quite comfortably, work things out, and let others get the help of others to get down to business and capture the criminal in this fashion, in this particular story. But there are also other cases where he does field work.
Yes.
We need to remember that too.
I think it's also reflected in the sheer order of the story.
Yeah.
How it's all perfectly placed out such that Holmes never loses control.
Yeah, quite right. He knows what's going to happen, right? He knows what's going to happen the moment he has visited the city, right? When he has had a good look at the different streets surrounding the pawnbroker's business, he knows that what's going to happen, and he waits. He almost lays a trap for the criminals, right? He catches them red-handed instead of having them arrested. There's drama to this. He wants the dramatic, staging effect in order to kind of make sure that everybody understands what a genius he has been, right? To lay such a elaborate trap.
Which is also what makes me wonder if he is very unreliable as a narrator goes.
He doesn't reveal,
Yes.
right? He doesn't reveal what's on his mind. He waits for the perfect moment. If you look at Poirot or even Marple, they just, have that big finale where they get everybody together in the room and then make the big reveal, and in the end get the due credit that is owing to them because of all the mind work that they do. You're quite right, but he doesn't want to reveal anything because that's what he claims, that he doesn't want to give any kind of hint, or he doesn't want to alert the criminals. Go back to that section where he kind of chastises Merryweather.
You're not very vulnerable from above, Holmes remarked as he held up the lantern and gazed about him. Nor from below, said Mr. Merryweather, striking his stick upon the flags which lined the floor. Why, dear me, it sounds quite hollow, he remarked, looking up in surprise. I must really ask you to be a little more quiet, said Holmes severely. You've already imperiled the whole success of our expedition. Might I beg that you would have the goodness to sit down upon one of these boxes and not to interfere?
Like a good child should be, right? Don't make any noise. We just should be seen, not heard. That kind of rhetoric is there, right? So he literally scolds him for behaving in an improper manner, and he says that you have already imperiled the whole success of our expedition. This is an adventure which he wants to see through successfully, and he feels that if you tell him that you are a very unreliable character, he would say that I'm not letting things out of the bag because I'm worried that you will spoil the entire expedition, right? That would be his explanation for being very, very cryptic. Right, but he has to be cryptic for this kind of genre to work, for Holmes's narrative to work, for the narrative that's kind of stitched around Holmes to be very successful. He has to come off as this particular morose, almost inhuman figure in some respects. I think Doyle himself calls him heartless at one point. So he is not like the rest of humanity. He's above them. So you can't expect him to behave like a normal human being, because he has extraordinary powers, and those extraordinary powers are about his capacity to think, basically. Think very, very clearly, to assess things and kind of even predict what's going to happen, right?
In relation to how identities seem to multiply in pairs. There is this name that John Clay's accomplice uses, Duncan Rose, who later turns out to have another name, William Morris, and then Vincent Spaulding and John Clay.
Yeah.
There is also the fact that we hunt in pairs. Jones says that we hunt in pairs. And there is Jones and Merriweather. There is Holmes and Watson.
Yeah.
But then what interested me, or piqued my interest more, is that towards the end, there seems to be an almost anticipated encounter between Holmes and John Clay, and there is also this confrontation where John Clay is trying to draw a gun and then Holmes prevents him. There's this confrontation, and we can see that Holmes has been looking forward to this.
Yes.
It looks as if Holmes is also being multiplied into John Clay's identity, as if there is some kind of the same dynamic that operates between Holmes and Watson multiplies in a different way between Holmes and John Clay. How do you...
Yeah, it's a good question, and you're quite right. There is a kind of an anticipation, and that is evident in that a particular point in the story where he says that I too have a score to settle. Right? Can you read that one? Because that will kind of give a lot of explanation to what you're talking about.
Really, Mr. Holmes, said Mr. Merriweather as we followed them from the cellar, I do not know how the bank can thank you or repay you. There is no doubt that you have detected and defeated in the most complete manner one of the most determined attempts at bank robbery that have ever come within my experience. I have had one or two little scores of my own to settle with Mr. John Clay, said Holmes. I have been at some small expense over this matter, which I shall expect the bank to refund, but beyond that, I am amply repaid by having had an experience which is in many ways unique, and by hearing the very remarkable narrative of the Red-Headed League.
Okay, he's already turning it into a story, the narrative of the Red-Headed League, so that's a different point. But to come back to what you have raised, he says, I have one or two little scores of my own to settle with Mr. John Clay, and that would lead us to think that Mr. Clay had outwitted Holmes in the past. So that's the assumption that we can reasonably draw from that comment. And yeah, go on.
Also, when he knocks on the pawnbroker's door and he comes and opens the he tells to Watson at a later point that we have had our own skirmishes, but we hadn't ever set eyes on
each other. Yeah, exactly. So that's a great moment, and we have no indication from the text to suggest that Clay has identified Holmes. He just opens the door, is very prompt with the answer, he just shuts the door and vanishes into the cellar, right? So even if he thinks that is Holmes, he doesn't care, maybe, I don't know. So it's a point of speculation that we can talk about at great length. But the other point that I wanted to raise is the description of Clay by Jones, right? And after that we have a response from Holmes. Can we read that too? I hope that section. I hope that
I may have the pleasure of introducing you tonight. I've had one or two little turns also with Mr. John Clay, and I agree with you that he is at the head of his profession.
His brain is as cunning as his fingers, and though we meet signs of him at every turn, we never know where to find the man himself. He's almost like a very interesting magician in some sense, right? He seems to be there. Yeah.
Cavity, the mystery.
Yes.
That is actually modeled after the Holmes.
Yeah, this narrative serves as a model for a whole array of texts, which is why this is continuously anthologized in terms of literary courses. Okay, so his brain is as cunning as his fingers, and though we meet signs of him at every turn, we never know where to find the man himself. So he is a man who is posing a big challenge to Holmes, right? So he's almost like Holmes's alter ego before we have this figure of the Moriarty, right? So he is equally important and interesting. He'll crack a crib in Scotland one week. He'll be raising money to build an orphanage in Cornwall the next. So he'll rob a place, and the next moment he will set up an orphanage in order to serve, the less privileged people. So again, we see that set of contradictions there in John Clay, and maybe he's doing it to hide his criminal, past or criminal behavior as well. We have that in the strange case of Jekyll and Mr. Hyde too, right? We have the doctor doing the good deeds, being very pious, helping a lot of charities, and at the same time as Hyde, he commits a lot of murders, right? So,
a parallel to those contradictions are also there in Holmes.
yes. Not literally, but we have similar contradictions, right? Similar contradiction in the sense that he also abuses substance, and he can be very rude and heartless, and not to the extent that we see in the criminals, but we can see that kind of behavior, the contradictory behavior, the jarring behavior in Holmes too. So I have been on his track for years and have never set eyes on him yet. So for years, Holmes have been tracking him down. So which will answer your question about the anticipation that Holmes has in meeting Clay and on kind of hitting him with that riding crop and making him drop the pistol, right? So it's a very, very interesting scene, and it's a very atmospheric moment as well. Everywhere there is darkness in the cellar, and he's just coming from below, right? From below the earth, as if, and then Holmes is waiting for him, and it's as if he's the devil who's coming out of the depths of the earth, and he's catching him. So it's a very symbolic moment too, I would think.
I also find, and I am just there was this reference in Coriolanus about how Coriolanus, the dreams that Coriolanus has are about battling his opponent.
Yes.
And finally, when they meet one another, it's like they have a sort of brotherhood between themselves. Like, I know you are my only worthy opponent. I have dreamt of fighting you. I have dreamt of choking you.
Yeah. So I want you to connect that with the conversation that Holmes has with Watson as soon as he has seen John Clay. What does he say?
Smart fellow that observed Holmes as we walked away. He is, in my judgment, the fourth smartest man in London, and for daring, I am not sure that he has not a claim to be third. I have known something of him before.
So look at the way he's classifying John Clay, his mind, his courage, and other things, right?
It's graded and ranked.
And shelved perhaps in his mind palace, to be taken out and analyzed and kind of executed in some kind of trap, right? So Holmes, in this narrative, we're told that appreciates the superior mind, right? More than he would appreciate daring and courage and bullheadedness, things like that. So at the end of this, what we can try to understand is that mind work, the processing of information, the gathering of information, but you don't do anything physical with that information. You just get other people to help you out, but the point is that you should have a solution to that problem in your mind before you even step out of your house. So that's what Holmes does, and that's what he is lauded for. The amazement that he produces, the awe he produces amongst his companions, right? That's what has made him into such a celebrity who continues to live to this day. Right. So I hope you've had a very interesting conversation from us about this particular story. Thank you for watching. We'll continue in the next session.